will introduce yourselves for the record, and then I will read the motion to refresh the other commissioners on the motion.
Getting Piker Group Architects.
Gordon Brewer, Piker Group Architects.
Lisa Plowman, Piker Group.
Now we'll repeat. Eddie Piker Group Architects.
Thank you. I want to read the motion so that I can refresh the commissioners. The motion was continued 4 weeks with the following comments. The model was appreciated as well as the changes made to the proposal in response to the commission comments. The retention of the garden concept is appreciated. All elevations of the building are important, and its scale and monumentality are important to preserve and appreciate. Preserve the view of the building as it reaches the ground, and allow enough width and orientation within the proposed paseos to be able to view the building from various points of view, including the view from the existing arch on site of the building and from Chapala Street of the rear elevation. The size, bulk, and scale continue to be of concern and should be mitigated, especially of concern of buildings 1 and 5 because of their large size. It was suggested that two-story elements be incorporated, or perhaps the grid-like orientation of the building should be revised into a more random one, as was shown in the inspirational image of the Andalusian village. Other suggestions would be to fragment the buildings and increase the setbacks in the village green, or eliminate the three-story elements altogether. It was suggested that some variation and serendipity of the design of openings as opposed to proposed more regular patterns be explored. There is concern that as an unintended consequence, existing trees may have to be removed. They should be saved. The preservation of Canary Island date palms was appreciated. The use of skyline trees, such as eucalyptus, should be studied for the Sola Street elevation. Preserve the rectangular space in the village square in a more open, natural, simpler way. Study the mechanics of the solar panel layout and the area for trucks to back up. Provide detailed information on the building heights and the development of the building's elevations. And last, restudy the number of bridges connecting the buildings and how they affect the perception of the bulk and scale. Will you start your presentation, please?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. We appreciated the opportunity to go back and try and make some changes to the plans, and I just kind of summarize very quickly what those changes are in general, and then we will go into the specifics of them. First of all, we made several changes to Building 1 over here, and we'll talk about that. We reduced the stair and kind of broke up the building a little bit more with a one-story roof element in here. We eliminated the tower, or that is to say, eliminated the bridge over here. We completely redesigned this building, which is Building 5. Previously, it actually projected out into the parking lot there, our driveways. So we completely redesigned it. We eliminated one of the residential units in order to further kind of scale back some of the mass at the edges, a little bit in the third stories in particular. So those are essentially the changes that we bring back to you to look at today. So I'm going to start by walking you through them, and then we made the adjustments on the model as well, and I think you'll be able to really see the effect overall on by looking at the model. So I'm going to go up to the third story plan because that's where the changes really become most evident. Yeah, and then we'll be looking at the elevations. We redrew the Sola Street elevation. Of course, we reworked these elevations on Chapala Street as per the requests made at the last hearing. So first of all, I'm going to talk about Building 1 here. What we did is we took advantage of the slot here between the buildings and lowered the roof down to a single story at the eave here, sloping up towards the second story in order to really create kind of a break in that building. We also reduced the stair tower so that at the third level it's actually an open stair, so it doesn't go up as a full tower with a roof over it at that level. And it doesn't actually show up here, but shows up at the other levels. And then we eliminated the bridge between these two buildings. That was one of the requests as well. Could we eliminate some of these bridges? And we thought that we could accomplish that over here, but we needed to retain a couple of others over here. And we actually have some ideas about how to make those bridges much lighter and more transparent. We can show you a little sketch of what that might look like. And then we completely redesigned this building 5 here in order to remove some of that third-story mass and reorient it and pulling it back so that the edge of it lines up with the edge of the Arlington Theater at this corner. So do you want to talk a little more about what's going on with that?
Point you there for a second. One of the things, the opportunities that it offered us when we reconfigured that building was to, I think, sharpen up the definition of the public spaces by pulling the building back to expose more of the Arlington Theater and pushing it out a little bit more towards the plaza. It really created a nice definition for this service court, which will be further developed when the next project comes underway. It really nicely defines this little plaza, and it also really sharpens the rectilinear definition of the green space. So I think for a lot of reasons that really worked out pretty well. We've got a couple of series of sections here to show you, and in studying the sections a little more carefully and thinking about this building, it became apparent there was some some advantages to the way the grade was working here, in that with these units, there's really from that corner to this far corner there is almost a 6 or 7 foot drop. So in order to set these floor levels appropriately, these residential units that are on the ground floor of this building are at 98.5 feet, which is really consistent with this little plaza level access over here. And that is like a full 4.5 feet above the grade here, so that there's an opportunity for this little patio now, which services the ground floor unit. He's really, when he's standing in the patio, is 4.5 feet above, so he's not feeling like he's down low and in the bustle or whatever hustle and bustle might happen in the service yard. Then will have a 5 or 6 foot garden wall. And there's room then on top of the parking podium for a good 4 foot deep planter to get some substantial plantings, and then to screen the trash enclosure, just a very low slung trash enclosure there, which kind of organically grows out of the building and is planted between the trash enclosure and the residential units. We also took advantage of by losing a unit, to carve the mass of this building down as you approach the Arlington and as you view it. If you're walking from Chapala, obviously when you're driving in this direction, there's a couple of things that happen. One, this corner is greatly diminished because we carved it back on the 3rd floor. And we also created this 2-story paseo or chink court between the two building masses, so that when it's viewed driving up Chapala, it's not a solid wall of the building. There's really 2 narrower building masses as you perceive it there. And you'll see the elevation a little further. There's a little more playfulness. There's a balcony and an Andalusian kind of staircase coming down, which mirrors a lot of what's going on in the Arlington. I think that.
Yeah, and when we look at in a moment, we can go over and walk over to the modeling. And we've got both of the original and the new, and you can really see the difference in the impact. So, moving along here, that's just the aerial photograph. These are the redrawn Sola Street elevations. We just kind of worked them a little bit more in order to more clearly articulate, make them consistent with all the other plans. They were pretty loose before, but the character has been basically retained, but a little more defined in this drawing than it was previously.
We're going to show them this little stairway in an effort to the little bridge. In an effort to really reduce the apparent mass of that bridge, we're trying to have a little playfulness, I guess, and get the bridge mass reduced as much as possible. So we're thinking about a graceful arch in stucco, and then just open wrought iron on the top, and a kind of almost a suspended wrought iron balcony below. Here's a little sketch of what that might look like.
So the idea is just to make it feel more transparent. If you're familiar with L'Arcata, there's that bridge that connects the two buildings quite high. We felt that if we had a bit more solid mass at a higher level, and then at the lower connection, sort of a looser, more wrought iron, transparent sort of look, that could really diminish the impact of having that bridge there. But those two bridges we do need in order to create the elevator access and exiting in those areas. So, shall we move on? Yeah, and then here's where you see the one-story roof. Of course, it's foreshortened here. It really comes up into that building, really kind of breaking the building apart at the second and third story.
Yeah, the nice thing about that, as far as fostering, I mean, the appearance of smaller masses of building, is you do see a lot of a wall perpendicular to the street as you're walking down the sidewalk. We have a section through there. You can see that later.
Yeah,
You
we
can
do.
see it on the model, too.
Several sections, so if we can move on. These are the other two elevations, one of which is looking from Chapala Street at the two buildings. This is the revised, the reconfigured building. Here we're looking at, as you can see, how it lines up now with the edge of the Arlington. It really reveals that rear elevation that you all indicated was indeed an important elevation that we needed to preserve as much of the view of that as possible. And then this building's remained pretty much the same, hasn't really changed.
Well, you asked for a little more playfulness and organic
I'm sorry, that's
fenestration
correct.
and articulation, so we did that at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. As a matter of fact, when you compare this to the other, it was much more sort of regimented previously, the placement of windows, etc. And then this is the elevation that you would see from looking south as you were driving up Chapala Street. I'm sorry, looking north as you're driving up Chapala Street from the south. And this is the entrance into the parking garage down below. This is the stair that Gordon was referring to that sort of echoes somewhat the stair on the side of the Arlington.
There actually is a stair similar to that. It doesn't have the
On the other
steps,
side.
but it's just a graceful stairway, a cantilevered, corbelled kind of staircase.
Actually, can't really see that much of the Arlington.
High volumes, yeah. So then we prepared some sections. I know that the issue of what the actual heights are going to be is important. Here you can see how, by virtue of trying to get this part of the building that faces Sola Street, have that be level with the sidewalk and the street here, which really I think is an important thing. I mean, otherwise we would end up dropping that down, and you'd have you'd have the floor level of this portion of the commercial below the sidewalk level. We really didn't think that would be a very good way of approaching that. So we got that up, and then we stepped the parking garage down so that it becomes more level with the grade next to the Arlington over here. And so you can see that on this side the ridge height here is about 41'6". Here are some of the different dimensions that we're working with. On the other side, it's somewhat similar in this particular section.
One thing worth noting on the street side and where the location of the parking garage, in some locations the frontage or the setback varies from a minimum of I think 3 to 7, 8, and 60 or 70 when you're going down the Paseos. But in order to get a little playfulness as we approach the street, and also to put the commercial frontage close enough to the street where it's actually able to be used for window shopping and things like that, which we feel is a necessary ingredient for a commercial portion. But the one thing we did with the parking garage is hold the parking garage 10 feet back from the property line so that any plantings that are in that strip have plenty of root zone to grow into before they hit any concrete.
Another thing is, this is the only portion of the project where there's actually commercial on the ground floor, so that creates some need to create a little bit more height on that ground floor, whereas the other buildings are all residential, so we have more flexibility in the height. So we'll look at some of those sections. But first, this is a little closer to Chapala Street in the same building one, and this just shows you where that low roof starting at the first story just above the commercial going up to the second story that kind of splits the buildings apart and creates that sort of that gap with some low roof in there. And then the elevation or the section below is really building 2,
Yes.
which has the all residential stories, but we still have a step in the parking garage here that requires in order to maintain sort of a level second story, basically, and second and third story. Otherwise, we'd have to deal with some really difficult
Well, we're considered we'll be an elevator building, so all the units have to be accessible, so it makes it really tough on those upper floors to step the floors on the upper levels.
But that gives you a little bit of a sense of the height, and then we have indicated the height of some of the elevator towers that are necessary for the elevator to be functional there. So I think that's essentially it. And yeah, let's just take a quick look at the model online. This is the building one that we were talking about, where we split the building with that lower roof. You really see how that accentuates kind of the breaking up of the...
I foresee a problem. They're not going to be able to pick this up on the...
Yeah. I'll just...
There they go.
So again, on this building one, you can see the low roof and the split of the mass there, and then how we've kind of lowered the roof as much as possible and kind of carved away the edges here at the to create really kind of a two-story effect along this edge. And then, of course, we eliminated the bridge over here. And then, as I said, we totally redesigned this building. This is what it was before. We eliminated a unit, and as we've just described the details of the redesign, this is the effect of that. It's quite a bit less impactful on that elevation, and as you can see, quite a bit smaller as well. And the way Gordon's configured this, the gap between the buildings, again, you get the sense above the second and up to the third story of a kind of a breakup of that mass, which exits out here to this sort of ornamental stair that comes down the side there. This is where we're going to have the trash enclosure, and then, of course, we'll have opportunity for quite a bit more landscaping than we had previously along that edge as well.
Yeah, just in the simplicity's sake, the model didn't show all the garden walls and all the planters and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, it's a master.
It's a basic massing.
It's a dumpster.
Right.
Trash enclosure, I should say.
For the Arlington or for this project?
Both.
This project.
Both. That's about where it is now, actually. We're just kind of rolling around. Yeah, that little appendage building that looks a little forlorn is actually going to be connected by a 4-foot-high planter when it's. We just didn't want to model the planter, but there are a couple of dumpsters for the Arlington about that location now, and so that will service the Arlington and the new project.
So, in conclusion, again, we've done our best here to be responsive to your comments by addressing the specifics, some of the specific issues you mentioned. We did end up losing a unit in order to accomplish some of those goals. I think it's, I believe it's an improvement. Some of the changes to the elevation, I think, are an improvement over where we were last time. So at this point, we're, ready to move on to Planning Commission with this project, and welcome your comments to speed us along.
I will
Madam
take
Chair?
public
I'm sorry. I just wanted to fill in that the structures report, you didn't accept the structures report last go-around. I did get the rewrite for the report today, so I haven't had a chance, obviously, to review it. So you'll be seeing that at the next meeting. Right? I'll get it back to you in time. We'll get it on the next meeting.
Can I ask a protocol question?
Sure.
Possibly? In terms of the report was asking for landscape history, which I have done. It's 2 pages plus 6 historic photos. Now, my question to you is, in order to save paper, would it be possible to give that landscape section to you to read, but to have for the city's files and for the chair's files have it interleaved in the complete big report. My question is, rather than have to produce the 13 copies of the big report, which just has that additional information, that was all. I will do it either way you wish, but it just seemed, in order to streamline and save paper, because that's the part you wanted to see, to find out, what was the historic landscape like, and were any of the trees on site part of the old Arlington or the second Arlington Hotel.
I don't.
Insert works fine.
Insert okay for everyone? Okay, and I have a question. I'm just wondering why, could reports be sent to us as PDFs? I mean, I don't even, not sure why I need a printout sometimes. I need a printout.
Well, we have looked into doing that in the past, and there's been, not everybody's got the same equipment or the same ability to read the reports. Eventually, we're heading there, though. I do have to warn our historical consultants that we're going to be receiving reports in digital form at some point, so that we can cut down on our storage and make it more accessible. But as of right now, we're still doing it. We're still using the paper in order to make sure that everybody has the same information.
Okay, thank you. So insert sounds fine, I think.
That would be wonderful, thank you, but then you will get a full copy. No, you're the one who said you don't need a full copy, but definitely will be a full, that insert will go into a full copy for filing at the city archives.
I'd like at least two, one for the city archives and one that, if we need a full copy here for these commission,
might want
we have it available
Fine.
at the meeting, so that's two.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you. I will ask for public comment now.
Over here. You don't need.
Which one?
This one is fine. And it is on. Kellum Forest, I see very little change from last time. Still 3 stories, still huge bulk and scale, still blocks the monumentality of the Arlington. I appreciate that it's pulled back on the Chapala side a little bit. And it's still, the facade still looks very much the same as a solid facade, because everything, I know some of the buildings have been set back a little, but certainly it still looks pretty solid. And I did want to ask, I gather, and I've forgotten, you're raising the elevation, are you not? So this will all be level with Sola Street? Right now there's quite a drop off of Sola Street onto the parking lot. So I would like to know what happens there. And nobody has found the proposed design for 1930 that was going to carry the stores around the perimeter of the Arlington? That still hasn't been found, I gather. Thank you.
No, it is not.
Not extant, so nowhere? Not in the Gilbert file?
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I talked to Henry Lenny,
yes.
and he was supposed to get me a copy of that, and it slipped my mind to follow up.
We called them and
but-
we haven't heard back from them, actually.
But Henry, he said that he did have he said he had the plans from.
Well, then if he does, then we should be seeing them.
I will contact him again and ask him to expedite that request.
Okay, I'm going to ask for questions from the commissioners.
I have a question.
Okay,
Except I can't turn on my cell phone.
yes.
Someone brought up a good point as to what is the grade differential between the sidewalk on Sola that you are proposing to be roughly your finished floor for the commercial and the parking
Part of
lot?
the commercial. It varies all the way along, but it varies from probably
Well, it's
3 feet at one end to maybe 3 or 4 feet at the end.
yeah, it's roughly 5, Yeah, roughly 5 feet, 5 or 6 feet.
You have a
total.
topo, obviously.
Yeah, we have a
that shows you
total.
all this that we haven't
Sola is
seen.
roughly 101 along Sola Street, and the parking lot is the middle of it is about 96. So that would be 5 feet basically.
The middle meaning,
The middle of the parking lot.
and
the
so as we
geographic
get
middle.
towards State Street, it's 6 feet or so?
No, as you
roughly?
get towards State Street, it's a little less. It's like 4. It rises towards State Street and it
that's what I
falls
meant,
towards
yeah.
Chapala. Yeah. So it there's basically a 5-foot drop,
Okay.
and we accomplished that in the 2 steps: the 30 inches inside the building, and then another 30 inches outside with that planter. There's a little planter that steps down into kind of the sunken garden.
Thank you.
Can I just ask you, Mr. Sharp, if you would like to have seen a topo with the changed contours and original contours in your deliberation?
Well, I think that's key to what I'm looking for, of course, but we haven't seen it.
Thank you. Do I have any other questions?
Yeah, I have some questions. You can go to the site plan. There were some comments as to the use of the space, and the question is, all these are required exits or parts of
They are.
of the
They are.
I see. Okay.
The only thing we're really proposing to leave this alone, and the only thing we're showing here is a suggestion to make it a little more attractive. Right now, from this, there's a little plaza, 1970s style exposed aggregate in there that we don't think is going to be that attractive when this is complete. So we're proposing something that maybe get a landscape architect to work a little more on it, obviously, but just some sort of more natural material like stone in there. But that's really essentially all we're proposing there. Otherwise, we're just going to leave it, and we may transplant or move some of the palms. We have to move into that area, or maybe on the perimeters where we have the 10-foot planting area.
So, but at one point, I think you were talking about some kind of a staging area or some kind
We
of
took that out.
That thing went away.
Yeah.
It's more like a passive recreation.
Right, yeah.
And regarding the landscaping, I think there were some comments last time. I'm not sure if you addressed it. I wasn't paying attention, but it was something about moving some of the queen palms in there. Okay.
And arranging them ultimately probably in this plaza here, or the garden area.
All right, great. Good.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to comments. Shall we start with Madame Boucher?
I'm still having a problem with the size of this project. One of the great things about the Arlington, I know we've been through all this, is the fact that it sits in the center of that block, and it just is this big, tremendous, great thing there. And as you go along Sola, you're hardly even going to be able to see the Arlington, maybe the tower, but that's about it. And I just think the third story is too much. Also, I feel that the architecture, while it certainly conforms to the ordinance, is really awfully busy. And simplicity, I'm beginning to think the better buildings. I hold up as an example, to me, one of the great buildings in Santa Barbara before the 50s was the News Press building, which is incredibly simple without the tower. That was George Washington Smith, and just very few details on that building, and it really, really worked. And I understand that this is a much different use, and you need different kinds of windows and so forth, but I just feel that the architecture is terribly busy.
Thank you. Mr. Curtis.
Well, I think the project is moving in the right direction still. I appreciate the fact that the designers have pulled back building number 5 to get a more open view of the rear facade of the Arlington Theater. It's also very complex to understand because of the different cutouts on the upper floors. The model helps somewhat in that regard, but it's not entirely helpful for me in understanding that, but I appreciate the fact that you are trying to do some cutting back of the building three-dimensionally on the upper levels of it. I also continue to appreciate the fact that you have preserved the interior courtyard open space area adjacent to the theater building so that one can get a sense of its monumentality by looking at that. I still want to be sure that the view of the theater from the diagonal paseo that starts at the arch will be sufficiently open that views of the theater building and the tower and the spire will be visible there. I know that that's your intent, and I think that's a very important thing to accomplish in the design there, and I appreciate the fact that you've tried to do that. I do like the fact that you've softened the bridge structure and made it a little bit more transparent as well. I would like to see the paseo from Sola, which separates buildings number 1 and 2, be opened up a little bit more as well, so that a pedestrian walking along Sola Street would be able to do two things: to see the monumentality of the theater building behind it, but also to see the courtyard and the greenery in that, so that it might be more enticing for people to go into and enjoy that particular area. I tend to agree with Louise that maybe some of the detailing could be simplified a little bit to not be quite as busy and as complicated, and these are more the surface treatments, the fenestrations and so on the buildings. But overall, I think it's moving in a very positive direction.
Thank you. Mr. Sharp.
I too think it's come a long way, and certainly a lot different from what we saw a year ago, whatever it was, last summer, whatever. However, I am concerned about the height, obviously, and from Sola it's 41.6, and you add 2.5 feet drop inside the structure, plus the 5 or 6 feet up to the Sola sidewalk, and that becomes 49 or 50 feet of structure.
That's not correct.
From natural grade, which is where we measure. So I'd like you to clarify that, if you could.
I mean, I think we've spent a lot of time drawing those sections. If we look carefully at them.
Me too.
Yeah.
And
So it's 45, isn't it, Dave?
Yeah.
let's. If I'm wrong, I'd really like. So we have 41.6 to the sidewalk, right?
From the ridge, yeah.
Right.
Plus
then
30 inches.
Right.
So that's what? That's 44.
The extensions, the measurements are already over there on the inside.
No, at
No,
41.6
that's
to the
it.
floor.
That's
It has
it.
nothing. It doesn't
Yeah.
include the 2.5 feet.
It's basically 41.6 plus 5, so it's 46.
What's the 2.5 feet?
2.5 feet is here, and then
I
there's another
understand
2.5
that. So
feet here.
41.6 plus 2.5 is 44.
Right.
To this finished floor.
Yeah. And then another
Plus
2.5.
5
No.
down to natural grade.
No, plus another 2.5 to natural grade.
See, this already gets you halfway down to natural.
That
But
gets
this
it
is
halfway
one
down.
building, and you take it to the lowest point that the
That's not-
structure
that's-
touches
Yeah.
the existing grade,
That's
which
not-
is 5 feet down.
That's the 5 feet down is over here.
That's excavated.
That's excavated.
No.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the grade of existing, which is 5 feet below the sidewalk.
It's 5 feet below the sidewalk over here.
But not right there.
Yeah, it steps, I mean, I think it goes like this. There's an embankment, and then it's sort of...
Which is
slopes
5 feet.
gradually.
No, that's
Right?
not quite 5 feet there.
You
no.
said 5 or
Well,
6
it's 5 feet out to the middle of the parking lot.
Yeah.
Well,
Not-
we're
not right
talking
at
the
edge.
lowest grade, I don't want to get
Right,
into
right,
yelling
yeah.
match here,
Yeah, no, I
but we're
understand.
talking to the lowest grade that the building
Right.
hits existing lowest grade.
Right.
So it's 41.6 plus
If you
the
add
30
fi-
inches
no, it's-
plus the 5 feet.
No. You added 30 inches too much, I think.
Okay,
Look, if you
Yeah.
take,
could be.
the difference
Yeah.
between this and this point is 5 feet. So all you really are trying to do is add 5 feet to that. So from that side there, you'd be saying that this was 46'6".
But the building height is measured by lofting up the actual
But
grade, and you can see it on the model when you extrude these things, with it pokes through that imaginary kind of envelope, basically.
Right.
But I think we take your
That's
point.
why
and
we
we have
need a
the
topo
ability
and-
to do some more
No, I agree.
lowering of
Yeah,
roofs.
we'll be able to
there.
bring
height,
that to the model.
obviously, is my concern.
Sure.
The bulk of the project on the site, the density, I think, is a little overwhelming. Analyzing the project with the third floor plan rather than the first floor site plan is a little bit difficult, because you were looking at all these roofs and it tended to minimize the footprint and the density on the ground. But it's come a long way, and I think it's going in the right direction. I agree that simplification is important against a backdrop of the Arlington. And another item, I really don't feel that you need to worry about having all your finished floors of these two opposite buildings the same height, elevators with, two stops. It's very, very common per floor, and you can easily drop that down 30, 48 inches and help relieve the height issue. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can remind the rest of the commissioners, please talk about mass bulk and scale.
That's what we are talking about.
Well, there are other, yes, I just want to be, I want to hear very clear.
Well, I agree with some of the comments. I'm surprised about the good comments about the news press. It's the first time I hear good comments about the news press. But maybe I misunderstood something. Oh, it's the building.
Yes.
Ah, okay. Got it. Okay. I like the improvements that you made on the bridges. You eliminate the few. I think half. I don't know. I can live with the two that you have. I think it's acceptable. And I like the improvements to buildings 1 and 5. I think I remember stating those comments, and you've done that, and I like that. What I like about the project is the way you have your paseos, and I was trying to get this done. Remember the first time you brought this almost like a year ago, that the relationship of the building to the street was not totally clear, and now it is. I like this. I like the fact that you can do this. I know you got to go through a ramp. Not so happy with that, but it is. Boom, you're going there, and you're from Solis Street. You do have some access to the inside, and that relates to the questions that we talked about on the structures report as to whether you see the walls of the building. Are those important or not? I'm fine with that. I like the way you improve the look. I think this elevation is very important because you drive up Chapala and this is what you see, and this has cleaned up very, very nicely. I think it's you can see it more in the model. You can visualize it. I think that's a very nice. It's a very nice look, and you see it more in the model. This is behind, and you can see this break, and it does look like two things, right? Before it was just one big mass. Anything you can do to lower the height of the back, if you can work out the height of the rear part, if there's any way to, I don't know how you do that exactly. I mean, I remember looking into two-stop elevators. You can go. If that can work, that would be a nice thing to do because it does two things. Not only it lowers the height, but also it breaks the height visually, and things start becoming more taken apart. I do agree with Ms. Boucher's comment about simplicity to a certain degree. That, for instance, if you can have these things look like that, this is one, this is another, instead of having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in that sense of simplifying, having less masses. I think in the one previously, the one on Solis Street, you can see how that will work to your advantage. Like it seems like it's a lot going on, and I know you've been doing that before, but it seems like it's quite a lot of pieces for each. So I think it will work to your advantage if you could unify these things a little bit more. As far as this, I like this break. I wonder if you could squeeze another couple of feet. I like the fact that these things start looking, in smaller pieces. Anyway, I like what the several things about this project, including the density. I don't have a problem with the density. I think like adding living units to this part of the world. I used to live 2 blocks away. I lived there for many years. It's really a welcome thing. It's something that you want to see people downtown. It's a great thing. I used to walk through this arch all the time. I mean, this arch, and that's how I know so much, because that's your access to the store. And I think it would be a great improvement to the neighborhood.
What was your comment that inspired us to make that happen? Madam Chair, may I just make one comment that I think is kind of important as we are listening to these comments? And our original proposal was based on the idea that the building should be much, much simpler, and then we were given a very explicit, no-holds-barred directive to make the outside look like the inside of the Arlington. So hopefully we can come together on what that should be at some point.
I think there was 2 people who made that comment, and I don't think it transferred to
And one of them ain't here today anymore.
Yes, I just want to remind the Commission, I'm looking at these compatibility analysis questions, and I believe everyone has been observing these, but just to remind you, first one is compliance with city charter, municipal code, general consistency with design guidelines. I think we've been thinking about that. Second is compatible with architectural character of the city and the neighborhood. Third is appropriate size, bulk, and the height and scale. Fourth is sensitive to adjacent landmarks and historic resources, particularly important in this case. Public views of the ocean and mountains. And sixth, the appropriate amount of open space and landscaping. I know we've all been thinking about this and commenting, but just keep this in mind. Okay. Mr. Drury.
Well, I think it's come a long way since I saw it first time, I guess, was 2 weeks ago?
Yes, 4 weeks ago.
But I agree with the comments so far. Without getting too technical, I don't agree with the idea of making the outside look like the inside of the Arlington. I think the outside should look like the outside of the Arlington more, which means simplicity, because I think it's a beautifully made piece of architecture from every angle, even from the Vaughn's parking lot. And I would like to see the whatever's built to amplify the Arlington as opposed to competing against it. And to that end, of course, I think if the roof line could be lowered, one of the problems is that Sola Streets is the high point. And so you're really looking down on the Arlington. And you're looking up at the Arlington from the Vaughan side. So it actually looks more monumental as you're coming up to Paula Street. So the roof line from Sola, of course, has that difficulty with the elevation. And I would love to see more of the Arlington exposed. But I think that the serendipity is... I think it's been overused in this city for the last 4 or 5 years. I would like to see something using the huge wall of the Arlington that faces west as a sort of a stepping off point to simplify that facade along Sola Street and by extension along Chapala. I also appreciate very much the moving of building number 5 so you can see the whole rear end of the Arlington. I think it's one of the lovely expanses in the city. And I think that Commissioner Boucher is right on the money as far as the news press goes. It's a place that would probably give some ideas as to what the facade on Sola Street and Chapala Street could look like.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Schallenberger.
So here it is, really. This height issue is at the forefront, really, with this project even. We have this thing tabled for 2 weeks, but if we went down the route we went down 2 weeks ago, this wouldn't be acceptable. And in my opinion, that would be a bad course of action, because this is good design. The numbers be damned. Good design should will out. So I just want to see more attention paid to, is it good design versus is it 45, is it 44, is it 41.6? Those numbers aren't exactly important to me. well, that's a can of worms. I know. I understand that. I do appreciate the response to the design comments of more variation last time. Perhaps you were steered in the wrong direction, but I can see why you are where you are. So it's completely understandable. You're definitely ready for Planning Commission. I mean, I would have a question though, a procedure. Can this project be approved if this ballot is passed in November? What happens to this project?
Well, as I understand it, if the ballot measure is approved and becomes part of the charter, then we'll have to comply with that at the time that we're ready to pull a permit, and I doubt that we would be before November, so that would be a miracle.
Well, it wouldn't go into effect till January, though, right?
January, but even so, it's not, we'll be lucky to
it's 2 months.
be at a planning commission hearing by then. So then we would have to deal with that. But as you know, there's discussion about defining just exactly what height is in order to allow for the playfulness of roofs and prevent the situation where you're forced to create sort of, cut off the buildings at 40 feet with flat roofs. So again, from our perspective at this point, obviously we know that it can be done. It just would create a building that we don't think is as good as what it can be.
Well, that's kind of where I was going. This is good design, and I have nothing but positive comments to say here. The only thing that stands out is Building 3 at the corner of Sola, especially in this, I don't know if it's the elevation or the section view. I think it's elevation on sheet 8, but you can see that massing stands out to me. The elevation from Chapala Street. It seems like your biggest building element, other than stair towers, is the closest element to the street. And I wondered if that could be studied for maybe some way to just lower that at the street. Yeah. It's that maybe you're thinking of it as an anchor point for that corner. I don't know, but it seemed at odds with what you're doing along Sola Street as far as stepping back the roofs and creating sort of a upper floor setback. And that's my only comment, really, with regard to bulk and mass and scale.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Regarding that issue, could you flip back to the Sola Street elevation real quick?
Yeah.
The only way you would actually see the building like that is if the block before it didn't exist and you were at least a block away. Maybe it would make it a little clearer if we had a photo sim or a perspective drawing showing how is the Arlington going to be seen if you're on, say, maybe across the street on Sola. Will you be able to see the Arlington through the buildings when you get a perspective?
Well, that's part of the DART packet, isn't it? The visual aid submittal packet.
Yes.
We will see that, I think, eventually.
Well, I was thinking you might want to see it before you sign off on the size, bulk, and massing, and then you're stuck.
Thank you.
Well, even a one-story building at Sola Street is going to block the view of the Arlington if you're walking down Sola Street. A two-story building is going to block the... Pardon me?
Can we have less of a dialogue and continue with the comments, please? Thank you. Mr. Adams?
Okay, nice work. It's coming along. I'll tell you a few things I really like is the simplicity of the courtyard. I like the fact that obviously some of the bigger palms are going to be moved. I think those palms are very important for the plaza, and I looked into the history of the big trees on this site, and there's all kinds of things, including big skyline eucalyptus trees, the California fan palm, which is kind of not super skinny, but California native, and the Canary Island date palm. They all have been represented over history, and so it's interesting to see that that kind of palette could work in certain spots. I think it's creative. I think it's going in a good direction. What I like about the project is that you have entry points, and I feel like visually anyway, it's inviting. I like how you softened and lightened the bridges with your wrought iron and then the arch shape under. And I think it adds to the transparency, and I think that's good. But there's some comments I have about the mass, bulk, and scale. I'm not entirely comfortable with the mass, bulk, and scale yet. And as you're working on this, I'm learning about it too. And I feel that building 1, and I don't know what direction this is. This might be northeast. This corner right here. I feel that the entry, that paseo, is too massive. There's too much of a massive, bulky shoulder. I feel like that somehow doesn't necessarily need to be widened on the ground floor, but I feel like the roof lines need to. I feel that needs to open up a little bit. And I guess I feel, again, I'm feeling that way about this diagonal entry into this courtyard through the arch. I feel that the diagonal entry into this plaza is a little bit too bulky and tall. I mean, I just feel like it needs to be opened up on one end or the other, or both. I feel like it needs sculpting. That I feel like it's too high and too massive for there. I love what you've done with this building. I think this is really some creative work. And I guess I also feel between building 1 and building 2, I feel like that could be. To me, it feels uniform. It may not be exactly uniform in the detail, but I feel like there's some massing that could open up to widen that. I feel like this is too thin. I feel like this paseo is too bulky especially on the second floor on up. And I feel like this needs some sculpting back, not adding to, but definitely sculpting back. But I think you're on the right track. I'm focusing on the mass, bulk, and scale, and I think if you work on some of the sculpting of the massing, it would be more compatible.
Thank you. Callum, would you mind just turning it off while you're in a meeting, and then this won't happen?
Excuse me.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I just wanted to point out that eventually the other side of this portion is going to be developed, and how this is developed is going to reflect very definitely on that. So I hope that the Commission will heed that.
Thank you. And let me just clarify, and this is one of the reasons I was saying the mass, bulk, and scale. I may have misinterpreted. As I understand it, there are 4 commissioners who feel that the mass, bulk, and scale is still too big, in some variation in scale of too big, and that 3 are okay with the mass, bulk, and scale. I have Boucher too big, Sharp too big, Mr. Drury too big, and Mr. Roberts too big. Is this correct?
Mr. Who's too big?
Robert.
No, it's too big in places.
But that's why I said a variation of the scale somewhere. You are so I believe I have 4 in the scale too big versus 3 here, and I am struggling with this tremendously. I agree with Mr. Sharp. I'm not so much worried about the height of the buildings as I am in the sense that I would have liked to have seen a topo, and I would like to have seen the existing contours and the finished contours. It just would have helped me to understand what was going on. The sections are semi-irrelevant to me in terms of things because, I just would rather have seen that myself. I also agree with Mr. Jacobus. I personally, and I see you have a perspective here, as I looked at the model, looking at it from a bird's eye is one thing, and it's a great view to have. But as I lowered myself down to trying to be a little person down below, these 3-story buildings got bigger against the Arlington. And I so very much appreciate your revealing of the rear elevation that you've almost tipped me to thinking I want to see more of that building. And it's not just the building going to the ground, it is the building that you have revealed at the rear. So I am uncomfortable, and I will say that as I read these motions, I think you have, of the previous time, that you have responded to many of them. But I will say that the serendipity remark was one comment, and that there were other suggestions and ways to tackle the mass, bulk, and scale and the design of this building, including removing some of the third-story elements and changing the grid and so on and so forth. And there were other suggestions. So I will summarize the comments as I see them.
Madam Chair, just one little bit of clarification would help. I hear that some people are uncomfortable with the mass, bulk, and scale as a sort of general statement, and others, like Mr. Adams, Commissioner Adams, stated that he would like to see a little more massaging, and that's a very different thing.
Yes.
And will that be distinguished in your motion?
Yes.
Thank you.
Please, it's not a dialogue.
Well, I think that's why we're here to get clarity of purpose.
I will let's hear the motion, and then let's hear if the commissioners agree with me or disagree with me, and then if you don't understand the motion, then we will clarify the motion. Does that make sense? I think in general, the commission feels you have responded very well to the suggestions from the last meeting, that you listened to what they said and responded well. There are some of the commissioners who feel that the mass, bulk, and scale is still not appropriate, and this varies from minor parts of the design to conceptual level of mass, bulk, and scale. And there are some of us who believe that the mass, bulk, and scale is appropriate. There is still concern about view from the arch as well as the paseos, in particular between buildings 1 and 2. There's some desire to have a widening of those paseos and a real concern about ensuring that the view from the arch at Chapala contains the spire of the building. I think almost everyone would agree that some simplification of the fragmentation that you have tried to do in response to what you thought was a majority view last time would be helpful. I assume, though not everyone spoke to it, that everyone is happier with the fewer number of bridges and the transparency that you have endeavored to achieve in the bridges. Everyone is very happy with your revealing of the rear elevation by moving Building 5. There's appreciation for the simplicity of the courtyard that you continue to have. And those are my summary. Is there anyone who wishes to...
A motion to continue with those comments? Continue, how long would you like?
Well, I'm just kind of trying to decide. I mean, really, we would be prepared to take these comments forward to Planning Commission, because I think some of these issues need to be resolved at the Planning Commission level. But I'm also wanting to be respectful of your notion to see a topo map, and we can certainly bring that back in a couple of weeks, but we're probably not going to make any substantive changes, I don't think, at this point, or we may or may not. But if that's something that you believe is really important to see next in a couple of weeks, then I would certainly be willing to do that, bring that back to you. Otherwise, we'll just move for an indefinite continue.
Say something about it.
All right.
Yes.
There was one other thing that we were hoping that we would be able to get Henry Lenny's 30s drawings. He says he has them.
Yeah, Henry told me, Adam, I tried to have them for this meeting, and it slipped my mind and slipped Henry, so I'll get back on Henry about that. Also, keep in mind that in 2 weeks you'll be seeing the revised structure report from Alex Cole.
I also wanted to heard comments to this motion, and I want to emphasize the importance we all feel about the paseos. They're very important. They're going in the right direction. They could they could improve. But the Paseo, I just want to make the point, the Paseos are very, very important. It's how people are invited into this historical landmark, the Arlington. It's a hub. So I just wanted to state that.
I think Mr. Pikert is asking, and I'd like to have some idea from the commission about whether it would be worth his time to come back to us and show us the topo. We'd then see the historic structures report, and we would also possibly see the 30s idea at the time. So who would encourage him to do so? Please raise your hand.
I think, the
Okay.
commission asked for a topo. You asked for a topo, you should see the topo and comment on that.
Okay, we'll be ask for a 2-week continuance and come back with that information.
Thank you. I appreciate your.
Yeah, sure.
You know.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Should I motion to adjourn?
Oh, please.
Adjourn?
I will